talks this morning, and I can say from dinner last night and all the things we talked about, there's absolutely no way I can complete in 15 minutes, but I'll try, okay? But one of the things I want to say here is that...
Your time starts now.
My time's up?
No, starts now.
Any questions?
Your time starts now.
All right. One of the things I got from the talk, and one of the things I'd like to start off with, novel methods for upgrading heavy petroleum products at the wellhead. Mostly what I'm talking about, and we have this vision that you know, we can do everything at the wellhead. You don't have to put it in a pipeline or truck and take it to the refinery. Now, we have a lot of evidence for this, and we even have things that are pretty commercially ready, but I want you to keep that in mind. The other thing, too, is that half my career was at Exxon Research, and half my career was here because I got involved with Mexico and Pemex and all that, so I wound up at UTEP. And I always tell my students I'm a Gemini, two people. One of us is still at Exxon, and one of us is there at UTEP, like that. And I think it's important because today I think the companies really need to work with the universities more than they have been in the past, okay? And we work with a lot of companies that are down here that I'm going to skip right now because we do have catalysts that are being commercialized by this company, Porcel International. These are refinery catalysts, but I'm not talking about those today. Okay. Now this is all, you know, several people this morning talked about the North American gusher and all the fuels that we're getting. I think that's standard information right now. And this term North American gusher originally came from the Wall Street Journal. Okay. And so when we talk about Texas here, petroleum production in Texas, I think we heard a lot about, gee, I didn't realize this was animated until just now. I thought I was hallucinating. Anyway, we have bio-inspired petroleum upgrade, sulfur removal, asphaltene destruction, API increase, catalytic coking, sulfur. All of these are topics that I'm going to quickly try to talk about that happen at the wellhead, okay? And the first one is called catalytic coking, 450 centigrade, 1 atmosphere of hydrogen for upgraded projects. And the second one I'm going to talk about is bio-inspired desulfurization, 200 centigrade, 1 atmosphere of oxygen. Because these things are, you know, low pressure, they can be done at the wellhead. The idea for the first one, catalytic coking, was one that came, and of course this is in Trinidad. We want to convert things locally like big lakes of tar like that. It's a different story. But this is something that came from work that I was doing at Exxon and the fundamentals of the catalysts. It's called Catalytic Micro-Reversibility. Every refinery in the world has either molybdenum sulfide, tungsten sulfide at 500, 2,000 pounds to take sulfur out. When you reduce the pressure to like 1 atmosphere in a coking condition, what it does, it looks around and says, there's no hydrogen, I'm going to take it from here, I'm going to take it from here, I'm going to take it from there. So what we found out was that when we did coking and put molybdenum sulfide in it, we got more coke because it's taking the bad stuff out and throwing it out as coke. But the liquids that we made were ready for the pipeline to go into the refinery because they were so clean. Conrad, some carbon, some of this data I'll show you as we get there. Basically what happens is you know, it takes the asphaltenes and lines and breaks them up, throws them out, it heals the, you know, alkanes and so on. The carbon was reduced nearly to 0 in a tar sand by this process. What you were doing with catalytic coking was throwing the bad stuff out and leaving the clean fuel. And this is something that we actually, this is a paper that we just wrote, by the way, that just appeared on this concept. And we also had commercial units beginning to practice this. Now, I don't want to go through this. I don't have time to go through it, but you can see what's here is that we have the regular coke. We have different, these are amounts of catalyst that we put in. And if you look at this in detail, which I'm not going to do, you see that the asphaltenes are reduced from the 11 to about 3 or 2. That's because they're basically thrown out. You can see that the Conrads in carbon is reduced from 13 down to 3 or 4 because it's throwing out the bad stuff. And what I tell you is, there's a lot of data to look at that's in the paper, and we really only begun to study what the catalyst would do, better catalysts. And of course, we need to recover the catalyst from the coke, okay? But that's the process, and this was just some more details about the API gravity of the different, lighter stuff and so on. And basically, we were able to take the tar sands and the liquid, I think the API for the pipeline was about 20. Meet that by just doing this catalytic coking. And when you look at this all in detail, you find out that what they're doing now, and I'm sure you all know that, is dill chill, where they get some diluent solvent from the refinery, they put it in, they dilute the tar sands, send it back to the refinery. And we all know that's very expensive right now. And this catalytic coking has the possibility of being a lot cheaper and being done right at the wellhead, putting the liquid into the pipeline or truck. See, I'm rushing along here. Now, by the way, this is the other thing I want to talk about. This is a Valdez. This is what we call a magic window. These are the hydrocarbon degraders that are there eating up the hydrocarbon. And one of the things that really thrilled me, you realize that there are 2 to 12 million tons of oil squirting naturally into the ocean every year. That's like 250, 300 Valdezes. What happens to that oil? It makes more fish. It's a natural product, goes up the line, and it makes fish. And the thing that I'm hearing this morning was that that's not a scientific fact that's well known. But that's a fact, and that does not even include the methane that's bubbling up from the methane reefs that are underneath too. And it's very important to understand that petroleum in the sea is natural. One of the things we did in Macondo, I did a New York television show on this. They asked me these questions, Well, they killed the oysters on the beach in Louisiana. You know why the oysters were killed? Because they washed them with fresh water. Anybody that knows anything about oysters is you can't wash them with fresh water, it kills them right away. So what I'm telling you here is that really the science in some of these things needs to be learned better when you're working in this area. And one of the things that we found when we looked at this was what we call this BIT, bio-inspired transformational technology. Here's the organisms. And what happens is they make a sulfone. When you starve the organisms of sulfur, they go and get it out of the crude, and they get it out of the asphaltenes, and they break the asphaltenes up by making these sulfones, okay? And here's the scheme here, too. So this is something that led me to think of, the bio vineyard. What you do is you fill the tanks, put the date on it, like the vintage. You put water and fertilizer in there, and you come back in a few months, and the oil is converted. These were things that we tried at Exxon to convince people. It was 60 days from the Persian Gulf to New Orleans. You could actually convert the heavy crudes using the biology. And what those processes, I always get a kick out of looking at the bio vineyard, because that would be a local thing that you could do around your well and use the organisms to purify break up the asphaltenes and purify the crude. But one of the things that really came out of that was what I like to call grandmother's stew, okay, upgrading petroleum hydrocarbons. What we found, looking at these sulfones that were made, was that if you just put a certain catalyst, in this case it's a gold on silica, specially treated silica, and again, this is something that's a patent we have right now, and you just cook it at about 150 centigrade, which is what my grandmother used to do on the bench top, right? Stir it in air, 1 atmosphere, and what it does is produce sulfones and breaks up the asphaltene. This is a little bit complicated for the few minutes I have left, okay? But if you look at this and you look at we were able to meet targets, to take a Texas mid and make it a Texas light by hitting the sulfurs with these things and destroying the asphaltenes. And like I said, I realize that this is a little bit, lots of things to talk about at length here too. But again, this is the product. And the interesting thing is these are some of the schemes that we've put through. And this is what's interesting, the red oil. Because what we have discovered is that we can get some very interesting products out of the bottom that you put on the street, the asphaltene. Okay? And I'm going to really end there because I have a lot here called oxycracking when we're bubbling it in grandmother's stew and so on. And what we get are polysulfones. Okay? Now this is a high strength temperature polymer, commercial from asphaltenes. Again, this is something we've patented and is in the process of being published. It comes out as a red oil. Here's the red oil that we've identified after cooking it. Here's the infrared spectrum that shows we've got that. And what we're trying to do right now is get this product out and sell it to a company because it's worth a lot more than asphaltene to put on the road. And there are lots of products that we're getting at it. Here's another one. These crystals that we got out here is this particular salt out of this process, out of the bottoms, out of the asphaltenes. And this is something that BASF makes 20,000 tons a year of because it's a pharmaceutical type plastic product. So I just want to leave you with the idea, and this was the final thing I'll say, is that we were making solar cells out of asphaltenes that work, patent issued, licensed to Hunt Patterns, it's commercializing them. And what I want to say there really is that I just wrote an article about this called Resurrection of Million-Year-Old Leaves, because what led me to think about this was Gretzel cells, where you put raspberry juice on, and it gets destroyed. When I was up there in Valdez, what you realize is when there's an oil spill, there's an oxidative photo reaction that links all the asphaltenes together, and then you look at the asphaltenes and they look like molecules that people are putting on to make solar cells, and it works. Okay. This is another thing we were talking about, a lot of things talking about using algae for fertilizer. So I'm sorry to be in a rush like that. I want to thank everybody. Happy Halloween. This is our group working there too. And if there are any questions, I use a lot of time, so you've got to ask Tony. That's it. I'm sorry I went fast, but you know.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Russo. Questions?
Do I have time for questions?
Yes, we have time for questions.
I know I went a lot of it fast. I encourage you to read the articles or the patents.
Well, I think it is a very interesting concept about this reuse of let's say material,
yeah,
and transform again in fish, as you said. I think it is a cycle, but it is very interesting to maybe to do some research, because I think it's a good opportunity to think about in a different way on the
we always say don't waste the waste. You know, that asphaltene has been a bad thing for so long, but then there's these molecules we're getting out of it. My gosh.
Russell, you mentioned API gravity. And what was the API gravity of the Exxon Valdez? Was it about 35 or 40? Was it heavy or light crude?
Well, I think it was really a medium. I don't know. I'd have to look that up in the article.
Well, here's my question. Let's just say you take an API 40 and API 20. The disappearance rate through soil microorganisms, how is that affected greatly or to some extent? Heavy versus light?
Yeah, I think that basically we have a lot of data that I have to look back at. And the one thing that I remember in all of this too is that, again, what we're doing is if you starve the organism, you know, you've got to give them nitrogen and phosphorus, but they also need sulfur for their enzymes. And our studies showed that if you kept the sulfur out, they would go after it in the asphaltenes and break them up. They need it. Now, the actual time is a different question. I'd have to look more into that too. Heavy is always harder than light. But the other thing I would say too is, and we had these experiments we call blinking flasks, where it would be black, and then you would put nutrient in it, and it would clear, and it would get black again. And the reason for that was that the microorganisms make a dispersant to get the oil in to their bodies, okay? And the result of that is that there was the Macondo spill, which was before the BP spill, or Ixtapa, excuse me, in Mexico. And what they did, the Mexicans did, was they just flooded it with Corexit, which is a dispersant. And hardly any of it got to the beach in Padre Island and all that, because it just works. And there was the thing in Valdez, they were prevented from using it, even though it was prevented, because the local environmental people said, don't use that stuff. But the message I want to leave is that if there's an oil spill and it's going up the thing to make more fish, after every major oil spill in the world, there's been more fish 2 years later. Big crops, Valdez, everywhere else. Let them use the dispersant.
You know, just for a fact, back in the 70s, we had to dispose of API bottoms at refineries, and we would apply it strictly to the soil. I think Shell had a patent on that, how many pounds of oil you could apply to the soil. And that was, that was the state of the art.
Yeah.
Take the API bottoms, which has dogs, cats, and oil,
Yeah.
and apply it to the soil, and we really had a great success
Exxon
with that.
had some patents on that too, and basically what that means is when we talk about wellhead conversion, we also talk about being able to keep the wellhead clean, and that property is called land farming. Oh, more questions.
For the material you made from for the photo PV cells, how good are they? What's the efficiency you can get to?
I didn't hear the question. I didn't understand it.
For the solar cell you made,
Oh, the solar cell.
how good
Yeah.
is the solar cell? And
Well, I think that when we were working on it, they were saying if you could get $2 per kilowatt, you'd be in business, okay? Initially, when we licensed it to Hunt, the efficiency was fairly low. I don't know what they've done. But when you factor in, you know, if it's cheap, maybe you have to make it bigger, but it's cheap. They need to report on it. I think in the paper we said something like 2 or 3%, not much more to start with, but cheap. And it was just interesting. The other thing that was interesting to me about it was we made ones 2 or 3 years ago that still work, because once you do that photopolymerization, a lot of the organic molecules are destroyed by the UV. This is, it's like an oil spill on the TiO2. It's going to be there for a long time.
Any more questions? Last question if no? Okay, we'll go ahead and
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Russell.